must be, Donovan? Perhaps it is indeed the season of the witch. On this October, the year of our demiurge 2017. Autumn has arrived, the spirits are restless, and it's an appropriate time to grok the divine feminine, including her story of rejection and potential return to this eroding civilization under the solar power of too many big penis gods and their lustful, raping hermaphrodite angels known as the archons.
Did you ever notice how in the Bible, whenever God needed to punish someone, or make an example, or whenever God needed a killing, he sent an angel? Did you ever wonder what a creature like that must be like? A whole existence spent praising your God, but always with one wing dipped in blood. Would you ever really want to see an angel?
Sophia is rising to rectify her mistakes. Must be the season of the witch. And as always, heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is. It just is. Especially when you arrive to Aeon by Gnostic Radio, an initiation by conversation into the dark corners of myth, magic, and meaning. A crash course in cult, culture, and conspiracy. A virtuous virus invoking and informing history, holiness, and heresy. Each week, I, your host, Miguel Connor, commandeers your connection to bring the most accepted and rejected scholars and provocateurs to your attention.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole.
Fun, compelling, and deeply weird. This is the blow your mind cocktail party conversation you always wanted to listen in on. Why? Because you bloody deserve it. Because you're finally bloody waking up after so many failed attempts. Except for the most recent one, when you decided not to just take the red pill, but insert a red pill suppository into your rectums of conformity, bigotry, and material idolatry. You know now you are the consummate soundtrack of the counterculture, and you're going to discover new heroic dimensions of yourself you never thought you had.
My father says that almost the whole world is asleep. Everybody you know, everybody you see, everybody you talk to. He says that only a few people are awake, and they live in a state of constant, total amazement.
I'm so glad you're here, oh you knights of Valis and spiritual entrepreneurs, you modern-day Tom Sawyers. Thank you. You make me feel like a natural aeon. Must be the season of the witch, and our astral guest is not only a witch, but a rising voice in the neo-pagan community. That is Danielle Dulsky, who materializes at the virtual Alexandria to discuss her maiden book, Woman Most Wild, 3 Keys to Liberating the Witch Within. It's truly an engaging book, and get ready for an immersive interview. For more information on Danielle, please visit, you got it, DanielleDulsky.com.
We have found the witch, may we burn her?
During our electric chat with Danielle, we discuss Sophia, one of the patrons to Aeon by Gnostic Radio. Who is Sophia, and exactly what does her story mean? In the Gnostic myths, Sophia is more than a mere goddess. She is an aeon, an idealized representation of one of the aspects of the mind of the supreme existence, often called the pleroma or fullness. For different reasons, depending on the text, she rebels or commits a transgression against the other aeons and the harmony of the supreme existence. Mostly because, being wisdom, she has to know and experience everything on her own. For this transgression, she is cast out of the pleroma into the void and undergoes a great passion. her sorrow and pain ultimately creating the material universe. She becomes pregnant with her distress and gives birth to Yaldabaoth, often associated with the Old Testament God, who forms and then rules the cosmos and creates humanity to store Sophia's essence, the divine spark. Thus, here we are in the cosmic battle of Sophia and her son to either rise to eternity or fall into temporality. That's the gist, basically.
She tore a hole in our universe, a gateway to another dimension. A dimension of pure chaos. Pure evil.
What does the fall and redemption of Sophia mean, though? As myth always points to many existentialist issues inside and outside of us. Here are some interpretations of Sophia in the Gnostic text. Sophia represents the fall of the soul into matter, or the underworlds of lower awareness, similar to the ancient stories of Persephone or Inanna. Other instances would be Helen of Troy in the Homeric accounts, and the lost Shekinah of God in Jewish wisdom literature. Sophia represents the high cost of wisdom. Humans throughout history have sought the gifts of wisdom, attempting to couple it with knowledge. Yet the reality is that wisdom takes a heavy toll on human existence, rarely becoming purified before an individual's personal universe is about to end. If you have wisdom, I'm sure you know the high cost you paid to get it.
Everybody is stuck with the things that they're not proud of.
Sophia is that dangerous nexus between the spiritual and the material. In Gnostic accounts, Sophia is often depicted as hysterical, neurotic, or even schizophrenic. Sometimes a predator, even. Yet at the same time, she is the sage mediator between heaven and earth. This indicates what many mystics have known. When mortals contact higher planes of reality, the mind is going to bend and even break. To be wise is to be sane, sure, but also to never forget those epochs of insanity that paradoxically paved the way.
Who am I? That's the real question, isn't it? Who am I? Who are you? What other questions are there? What other questions are there, really? If you want to understand the universe, embrace the universe, the door to the universe is you.
Sophia is a sort of Hellenistic koan. A koan, utilized mainly by Zen Buddhists, is a paradox to be meditated upon in order to abandon conventional reason and attain intuitive enlightenment. How could the wisdom of God fail? Is wisdom without experience wisdom at all? Can perfection fail? Or is failing just part of perfection?
What does that mean, Buddha?
Sophia represents the disastrous state of knowledge without wisdom. In some Gnostic cosmology, once the divine realms lose wisdom, the ultimate existence goes in a state of crisis, sending out other aeons like Lilith or the Logos to set things straight. Wisdom may not be perfect in her attempt to teach us that there is no perfection, but casting her aside usually leads to the grimmer aspects of human history.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
Sophia represents the essence of comfort. Despite her mistakes and ambitions, Sophia finds a way to instill serenity within herself and her children, that is humanity, and sometimes all sentient beings, as in the Manichaean traditions. Not truly worshipped in any of the Gnostic writings, Sophia is a literary illustration teaching that peace is attainable through the hardest of times. Her characteristics of complex femininity, curiosity, and the ultimate ability to be humble enough to ask for help makes her the great companion in any dark night of the soul, as well as the ultimate trickster deity.
You, no trouble. Me, fifth element. supreme being, me, protect you.
Hope this grants you some insights in your journey of finding the pain and comfort of wisdom. Must be the season of the witch. Let us find the witch and the divine feminine in our interview with Danielle Dulsky on her book, Woman Most Wild.
Everything that lives is designed to end. We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. Is this a curse? Or some kind of punishment? I often think about the God who blessed us with this cryptic puzzle, and wonder if we'll ever have the chance to kill him.
This is the AM Bite interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Danielle Dulsky to discuss her new book, Woman Most Wild, 3 Keys to Liberating the Witch Within. How are you doing today, Danielle?
Very well, thank you.
And thank you for being on. It's definitely a pleasure. So why don't we start with in the beginning, as I like to ask all my guests. Tell us a bit about your background and how you came upon your current spiritual journey.
Wow, okay. So I don't know how far back you want me to go.
As far as you want. Those moments of awakening when you maybe felt you didn't belong and there was more to life than what was in front of you.
Okay, well, I have a lot of those. I was raised pretty evangelical Christian, so I went to a born again Christian school every day, and then I went to church twice a week. So I had a lot of those moments that you're talking about, where it was kind of like, feeling like I didn't belong. So being told that divinity was not only external, but also male. So, very much not a part of me. I have lots of vivid memories. I remember being in kindergarten and we had these missionaries come and speak, and they had just returned from Africa, and they were talking about, saving all of these people in Africa with the good word. And one of the little boys in my class raised his hand and said, well, what about the babies and the children that you don't get to talk to? What happens to them? And these missionaries said, well, they go to hell forever. And I thought, well, that's not fair.
Yeah, sorry, you weren't there. Nothing I can do about it.
Right, you missed out. So that was kind of my first moment of and then like any question that would get asked was kind of, you were punished sometimes for asking questions. So and I have this memory of having to color the defenestration of Jezebel in Sunday school. So, this woman being pushed out of a window and coloring it like it was like this kind of happy, lighthearted activity in my coloring book. But then, so, my mother was kind of very much in charge of my religious indoctrination. And then my father didn't share my mother's religion at all. So he was kind of this atheist biker personality. So, I had this real dichotomy during my childhood between my mother and father. And when I was 12 years old, I became really intrigued with this practice of yoga. And I don't remember how I got so intrigued with it, but I really wanted to do it. And then my mother said that it was evil and of the devil and I couldn't do it. So then I really wanted to do it.
Yes, of course. Tell somebody not to do it and immediately they got to do it.
Exactly. And so because I was so young, I needed somebody to sign the liability release for me. So my dad signed it for me and I started practicing yoga. And my very first class, there was this woman who is very famous now. Her name's Kiran Mishra, and she was teaching at this kind of backwoods yoga studio in Pennsylvania. So it's odd that was my first introduction to yoga with this amazing teacher. But what stood out was at the end, she says namaste, and the light, the divine in me honors the divine in you. And I thought, oh, that's different. I haven't heard that before. So, divinity being internal and the body being holy and all of that was very intriguing to me because that wasn't part of the religion of my childhood. And she was also a tantric yoga teacher. So she was talking about this experience after class was over about seeing a deer cross the road and talking about it like it was the most amazing experience she'd ever had. And I thought, wow, I really want to look at the world the way this woman looks at the world. So, since then I had been practicing yoga, and I taught my first class to my high school gym class when I was 16. And I've been teaching since then. So yoga was kind of my gateway between Christianity and witchcraft.
Your gateway drug, huh?
It was my gateway drug. Yeah, absolutely. Because, they were talking about divinity being internal and the body being holy. And then in terms of like a moment of awakening, I lived in Ireland for 6 months when I was 18. I was in a foreign country and I didn't know where I was. But it was, looking out on this foggy field, there was a cairn there was sheep, and I just had this really kind of ancestral experience. Like I felt like I was okay and like I was being held, and it's difficult to describe. But that was the moment where I really thought, I'm going to explore this idea of paganism more, and I'm going to do it without fear. And maybe I'm not going to tell people about it, but I'm going to do it. And so I did. I kept doing it after I returned home. And it wasn't until I was 25 years old when I had my first son, where I was full on into witchcraft. I was practicing it every day. I was reading everything that I could. I was learning everything that I could. And I was having one of those kind of dark night of the soul moments that you have as a young mother, where you're nursing your baby at 3 a.m. and you just feel like you're the loneliest person in the entire world. And I thought, I want this baby, I want my son to be as authentic as possible. I don't want him to have to hide huge parts of who he is. So if I'm not going to be a hypocrite, then I can't do that either. And so, that was kind of a strategic decision on my part, that I was going to be as authentic as possible. So I didn't start, screaming from the rooftops that I was a witch. But, if people would ask me, I would tell them. So, I stopped hiding it. And then I did what I think a lot of newer witches do, which is as soon as you come to this new path, you're still kind of looking for somebody to tell you that you're being a really good girl. You're looking for somebody to tell you that you're doing it right. And so you start looking for some kind of a spiritual community. And where I lived at the time, it was this very conservative part of Florida. So my options were limited as far as a community of witches. And so I fell prey to spiritually predatory behavior. And so I fell into this coven that was really up to no good. And I realized that relatively quickly. But it did end up to, kind of resulting in the dissolution of my marriage and this kind of huge wounding that happened as a result of me just trying to find any kind of spiritual mentor and just looking in all the wrong places for that. So then I decided, I'm moving back to Pennsylvania. So I'm moving back to where I was raised. And then I'm going, screaming back into the broom closet. And I'm never going to tell anyone that I'm a witch ever again. And so that lasted about 5 minutes, because where I moved to ended up being this very witchy town. And it has a great community of open-minded people. And so I started, circling with a lot of women and teaching and doing leading a lot of workshops and trainings here, and really found a sense of community that I hadn't had before, this acceptance that I hadn't had before. And in doing that, I wasn't really teaching witchcraft. So I was still practicing witchcraft on my own, but I was leading, women's circles and moon circles and trainings that didn't really have the word witch in them, like yoga teacher training. And what I was finding was a lot of women that would never call themselves witches, when they would cast a circle or hold a wand or, pass the sage around or things like, talk about the directions, things like that, they would have this sense of like, oh, I've done this before. There was this sense of familiarity and of homecoming that was interesting to me and to them also. And so they would come to me and they'd be like, now I have this sense of wild womanhood or whatever. What do I do with it?
Right.
I think that my story is not particularly unique. And that's the reason why I tell it. It's not because I think it's special, but because I think that a lot of women share that wounding, that experiencing some kind of spiritually predatory behavior and then deciding that they're never going to circle with anyone again or share their spirituality again. And that's such an important piece of it, because it allows it to be integrated into your everyday life when you have community. So, that's the reason why I'm so free with sharing what happened to me.
Yes, you just said we all have to go through the path, but what advice do you have for those who are seeking, or like you said, coming out of the closet or so forth? Or is it simply, you have to go through it? Like they tell people, when you start getting enlightened or gnosis, you're going to go through some terrible times, and you've got to make those mistakes to have wisdom. Or is there any practical advice you give other women?
Yeah, I struggle with that. I don't know if it's kind of like a necessary rite of passage to be wounded in that way, because it does seem really typical. I hope that's not true. I hope that it's not something that everybody has to go through. But what the advice that I usually give is for newer witches to learn enough on your own about the things you like about the craft, the things that you're drawn to in spell work, like what you really like. Learn enough on your own to be able to find a spiritual mentor that you really resonate with. So you're not just looking for anyone, and that you also know enough to stand on your own 2 feet, so you won't fall prey to someone that's just looking for somebody to, bow at their feet or whatever.
That can't be easy. You were in Florida, in the middle of nowhere, in a conservative place. How are you going to find somebody? I guess the internet helps, doesn't it?
The internet helps. Yeah, there is this great thing that I am not affiliated with in any way. And I feel like people think that I'm lying because I plug it so much. But there's an app that's the Divine Feminine app. And all you do is you put in your zip code, and it shows you like these lists of circles and covens and things that are just in your area.
Oh, that's
and I
so
thought,
cool.
like, that's such an amazing thing that I didn't have when I was 25. But I think that that's a great resource now, the internet, because it lets you research people. Like, if you're thinking of beings, taking on somebody to be your spiritual mentor, you can just Google them now. And
they have a LinkedIn
if they've
profile.
done anything terrible, if they've done anything terrible, like chances are it's there, and that's something that I didn't have when I was younger.
Yeah, in a way, these are great times. So what made you decide to write Woman Most Wild?
Yeah, it was just, working with a lot of women that were looking for like kind of step-by-step plan for how to really pursue this. And it was something I struggled with because, any feminist spiritual system is against oppression, and then it kind of defies that idea that there's a system at all. So, it was really hard for me, and I struggled with, what are these keys to witchcraft, and what's step one?
The 12 steps
really
of
difficult.
witchcraft. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. It was really hard. But that was what it came out of is those keys, that idea of wild rhythm and wild ritual and wild circle. So, looking at your own individuality. So looking at what makes you feel spiritually authentic and then going from there. That's what it's all about. So you're not looking for an external existing system and then trying to kind of fit yourself into some pre-existing mold. It's more about start with you and then go from there.
Makes sense, because yes, when reading your book, it's, again, there's not a mechanical do this and do that. It's more, as you say, reach for your inward powers, reach for the elements outside of you, and basically find your own art. It's a very poetic book.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, and if you look for a lot of the resources that newer witches have, there's a lot of just kind of spell books out there that are really creative, but any spell that you write on your own is going to be so much more powerful than one that you can read that somebody else wrote, no matter how powerful they might be in their own craft. So, it was trying to show people how to develop their own craft, and write their own spells, write their own books of shadows, and do it on their own rather than try to copy or mimic anybody else's path.
And something I must ask you is, what exactly, for the audience, because it's still very loaded and a certainly misunderstood word, but what exactly is a witch?
Right. So any witch will probably give you a different answer. There's a number of different answers to that question. For me, a witch is anyone that meets both of two conditions. And the first one is that they practice witchcraft. And witchcraft is another word that has a lot of definitions, but that they believe that they practice witchcraft. And you can practice witchcraft without being a witch. I have very dear friends that are witchier than me and practice spell work and rituals more often than I do, but still won't call themselves witches. So you can certainly practice witchcraft without calling yourself a witch. But then the second condition would be that you've claimed the name witch for yourself. So it's not something that's been externally given to you without you really identifying with that word. And you certainly don't need external validation to call yourself a witch. So a witch is anyone that practices witchcraft and has claimed the name witch for themselves.
That makes sense. I mean, it's like somebody calling themselves a chaos magician. You're going to get 20 different answers and very similar. So again, a very individualistic path at the end of the day. I guess you're responsible and it's your path.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And early in your book, Danielle, you say that women, quote, have been told they must live in spiritual poverty. What exactly does that mean? And what are some ways we can solve that?
Yeah, so, that was what I was talking about in the beginning, and being told that, we're raised in a patriarchal society. So we're raised in a society where the dominant religions are very much male-based. So spiritual poverty meaning, you can be spiritual, but you have to believe that divinity is masculine. Or you can be spiritual, but you must believe that divinity is completely external and not a part of you at all. You can be spiritual, but your body is disgusting, right? Or your emotions are something that have to be transcended or ascended. So that's the idea of spiritual poverty. And I don't think that it's just women that live that way, because, the masculine and feminine live in all of us. So even men really need to harvest their feminine spirituality also. So being told that that divinity is internal is absolutely everything, and so that's kind of the future that I hope the children of the world that I hope the children of the future live in is one that tells them that divinity is as much a part of them as it is any deity.
And another part I liked, you talk about the issue of appropriation. You said, be careful with that. And I sort of go back and forth on the whole thing, but sometimes it's hard because sometimes, let's say you're a white woman and you feel a calling for, let's say, Isis or Santa Muerte or Hecate, goddesses that are definitely from a different cultural background, but you're drawn to that. So you should say, just go for it.
Well, so what I say is to always be as respectful as possible. So yes, if you really feel called to research, so I think that's the word I use a lot in the book, research and learn as much as you can, but then, look at who wrote the research that you're reading also, because a lot of times that was a white man also. So, research, but be as respectful as possible. And, do you really feel like, these goddess archetypes that you're drawn to, like always be exploring why? Why are you drawn to them? Is it because you feel they're exotic? Is it because you feel like you could own them or adopt them? Or is it because you really resonate with them and you feel like you could work with them in your practice? And I do think there's a subtle difference, but if you tune into it enough, you can really tell the difference between wanting to appropriate and then, being able to research and learn on your own.
Yeah, and you can always just play it safe. You could go for something like Baphomet, who's hermaphrodite, and there's very little about him, and just make him your own.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right, because, very often the gods and goddesses or the deities that we're drawn to them because we resonate with them in some way. Like we feel like there's a part of them that lives in us in some way. So it's not so much the deity, the name itself. It's something about their energy. And so, when you ask yourself, why am I drawn to that deity? Very often it's not the deity itself, but it's something about that deity that you could work with without having to, build an altar or worship this deity that belongs to a religion that's not yours.
Sometimes, for example, you research a goddess like Hecate or even Isis in the Greco-Roman era, and you find what you started with is some goddess who was in charge of this. You find they're really transcendental. They're supreme beings in themselves. They're goddesses of the destruction of boundaries, especially like Hecate.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And that they almost always have some kind of a counterpart in different cultures. So, I think he's just said universal right now. Like a lot of these ideas of the divine feminine, they're very much universal. And so, culture, I don't like to say they transcend culture because they kind of descend culture, right? Like they're really buried in there. So yeah, I think that's why we're drawn to them a lot, is because we just don't have that idea of a goddess of destruction, like the divine feminine being the destructor and the dark feminine and death and blood and all of that kind of being wrapped into, this idea of the dark moon, and letting go and the season of autumn. All of that is kind of something that's very much suppressed in our culture. So I think that whenever we find that, regardless of gender, whenever men or women find that, they can react with fear or they can react with like, oh, I want to know more about that.
For the audience, could you tell us briefly about the sections of your book? What are the 3 keys to, quote, liberating the witch within?
Mm-hmm. So the first key is wild rhythm. And what I mean by wild rhythm is not just learning these different norms about the solar and lunar cycles. So not just, we have all of this power right now. So at the time this is being recorded, it's the full blood moon. So it's a super power time. And it's not just learning those kind of typical norms, but also learning about the way they affect you. So you kind of go back through your own experience and you figure out, how do I always feel in autumn? How do I always feel in summer, right? Is there some kind of a pattern that you can really trace when you go back through your experiences, and then use that to inform your magic and your spellcraft? So that's how it becomes authentic, is if you really feel connected to your ancestors in autumn, for instance, like I do, connected to those in spirit, a little bit more attuned to what I call the ether, or what goes on behind the veil, then you can use that in your magic. And if you don't, then if you don't feel drawn to that, then you don't use it. So you're not copying what somebody else is doing. You're looking at your own experience and then going from there. So the second key is wild ritual. And so that's your magic and your spellcraft. And so what I mean by spellcraft is the spells that you cast are your conversation with the world. So every spell that you cast is your way of saying, this is the world that I hope the children of the future will live in. So every spell you cast is infused with these really deep values. And this is where it's important that the witch is really an activist. So, it's not just this woman kind of like carving prosperity symbols in a candle in her kitchen and, just hoping to invoke millions of dollars for herself and not really thinking about the rest of the world. It isn't that. It's very much about the global community. And so every spell that you cast is infused with your very deep values. And when you cast those spells, it's very much informed by wild rhythm. So how the cycles of nature affect you uniquely. But then also it's all about intention. So whenever you cast a spell, you really have to affirm that you have the right to affect change in your world. And so for a lot of women that have been raised in patriarchal society, that's a huge hurdle to get over, is because we've been told that that divinity is external and male. And so when we're trying to, claim that we have the right to wield magic, we really have to have this sense of empowerment that we probably weren't raised with. And so that takes a lot of practice, but that's the second key, wild ritual. And then the third and final key is wild circle. And wild circle is probably the most controversial one in my book as far as the pagan community is concerned. And it's because I'm not saying that if you are a solitary practitioner and you don't have a circle or a coven, that you're any less witch. I am not saying that. And I think that, spirituality ebbs and flows all the time. So there's times when you're drawn to the circle, and then there's times that might be years and years where you just want to circle on or be on your own as a solitary practitioner. And that's totally fine. But why the wild circle is important, even if it's very cyclical and only happens once a year or once every few years, when you come together with a group of like-minded seekers, you're able to really place, the discussion of the mystical and the magic alongside the very mundane things like, the kids are staying up too late or whatever it might be, right? So you're placing the magic alongside the mundane. And when you do that, you're allowing your spirituality to integrate into your everyday life rather than just being like this extra layer that's just kind of slathered on top of everything else, which is then very easy to peel off and ignore. But if you really integrate it into your everyday life, then it becomes everything. And when you have a circle, you also have this huge resource for validation that we don't have in our everyday life. Like, depending on where you live, especially, witches don't have a community that they can just go to. Maybe there's a store here and there where you can go to and really feel like you're held. But when you have a circle, then it really validates what it is that you're doing. And it's a validation that's not the same as, seeing an article on Facebook that you really resonate with or something like that. It's this very unique, particular validation that we definitely need as witches and in the pagan community.
Yeah, and this is it's very interesting because you also write about the 3 gateways to ethical magic. Tell the listener about that, since it really ties in with the whole idea of being a positive member and in the flow of the universe.
Yeah. So, that goes back to your magic always being the conversation that you're having with the world. So that's probably the biggest, the most heatedly debated issue in witchcraft is this idea of the Wiccan Rede, which is, and ye harm none, do as you will. So, what does that mean, harm none? And so my philosophy is, the magic should always be the conversation that you're having with the world. So if you're casting a spell and it's harming someone and it's easy to think of harm as being like towards somebody external, but it also can't harm you either as the practitioner. So, not harming anyone, isn't that the world that you want the children of the future to live in? Right. So even if, your vision of the world of the future doesn't particularly match mine exactly, that's okay, because your magic won't match mine either. But every spell that I cast is going to in some way relate to my hopes and my dreams and my vision for the global community. And so I certainly wouldn't want to bring harm into that, because I'm looking to create a hopefully nonviolent world. So my magic is going to reflect that.
And of course, I have to ask you this, and in fact, you mentioned it in your book. You mentioned the book by Caitlin Matthews, Sophia, Goddess of Wisdom, Bride of God. So tell us about your views on my mutual patroness, Sophia.
I love Sophia. I have, I was just thinking about this the other day. I have, because I recently moved, and so I was rehanging like all of my artwork. And a few years ago, I created this like felt tapestry. So with needle felting, where you're kind of poking this wool roving into a felt backing, and it takes forever. And I created one of Sophia, and it must have taken me like at least 7 7 or more hours. And I seriously did it like straight through.
Wow.
Like I didn't get up, and I really don't have a lot of memory of doing it. And so it was this very bizarre experience, but I have it, and I put it next to my dining room table so I can see it all the time. But it kind of felt channeled, and that's how she feels to me. So yes, I love that book. I use it as one of my textbooks in yoga teacher training, because she kind of covers everything in that book. She covers, the way Sophia relates to Lilith and like the dark goddess aspect, and I love that because a lot of books that I've read on Sophia, they don't mention that like darker aspect or the shadow. Sophia, I don't know that much about her scholastically, or academically, but I really resonate with her as being kind of like a universal face of the divine feminine. And I think that she's one of those goddesses that you can like start exploring and like go back and back and back. And there's really this web there. It's like clearly, cosmic in nature.
No, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, I always tell people that because they go around, go, Sophia, Sophia. It's like, well, if you read the text and you sort of meditate it, there is a very dark and destructive side to her. I mean, it's right there in the text in black and white. I mean, she's black and white. She's got an agenda, and she's playing for keeps because that's what wisdom does. It's going to get to where it needs to get no matter what.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. And there's a verse that Caitlin Matthews quotes in that book toward the end where she talks about gnosis, how you can't gift anybody with it, right? Or you can't teach anybody gnosis. You can only hold space for them to realize it. And I feel like that's everything. Like that's what I use in my yoga teacher trainings, that idea of like, you're not gifting this, you're not, lecture and drilling this idea of divinity. You're just holding space for people to realize it on their own. And I love that. I feel like that's, the path that every spiritual teacher, spiritual mentor should follow.
Yeah. You're creating unsafe spaces for people to find themselves. The hardest journey of all, wisdom.
Yeah, exactly.
One of her avatar, at least according to the Gnostics, was Mary Magdalene. Does she resonate with you at all?
Oh, yes. I feel like I know her. I've had a lot of meditations where she comes to me, and and I have some, kind of bizarre meditation experiences with her. I had one where I was in like a, those salt tubs that they have where they put you in like a floating room and you're just kind of floating in this like salt bath.
Oh, yeah.
It's like sensory deprivation, but without the enclosed space. So I had this really like hour-long conversation with her when I was in one of these salt bath tanks, which sounds crazy to say, but it was totally true. I think that she's the feminine face of God to me, right? So I feel like she's the one that's really been written out of the sacred texts as far as Christianity goes, and I think she's come back.
And a lot has been clarified. And are there any other, let's say, Christian figures that speak to you? I know it's hard in the Bible, but maybe even when you were raised as a Christian, did anything jump out or that you find some sort of resonance with?
Well, I always resonated with the women that they said were evil.
I want to hang out with them.
Mary Magdalene, certainly. Jezebel, for sure. The Whore of Babylon, I remember like learning about her for the first time and just thinking, wow, she has this beast with a bunch of heads that she rides.
She goes to all the cool parties.
Yeah. So, and Salome, all of the ones they said are, the evil ones. I just always had this sense like that there's more to the story. So, I wasn't like a little kid thinking I'm going to vindicate all of these women, but I was, thinking like, I bet there's more to that story.
And what about Lilith? Where were you when you found out the story of Lilith, which I always thought was just amazing because it opens up the book of Genesis.
Yeah, where was I? I don't know where I was. That's a good question. I wish I had some kind of an epic moment when I learned about her. I do love her. I have her tattooed on my arm. But yeah, where was I? I don't know. But I forget what book it is that I have. I think it's Mysteries of the Dark Moon by Demetra George. She retells Lilith's story in this great way, where she's quoting like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Epic of Gilgamesh and all of these really old ancient texts. But then she's telling the story and basically, talking about, Lilith wants to be on top during sex, and
Right.
Adam running to God and being like, God, my wife's not listening to me. So Lilith's another one, but the women that just weren't like given a fair shake in the Bible, those are the ones that I loved.
Yes, indeed. I think mine was, believe it or not, I think I was about 18 and I was reading Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, and he talked, and the characters are talking about the myth of Lilith, and it just blew me away. I was like, what? Who's been hiding this wonderful stuff all this time? This is great. What a powerful woman. And what about some of the ancient goddesses? Which ones resonate with you and for what reasons?
Ancient goddesses.
Or new goddesses, whichever you want.
Or new goddesses. So we've named some of my favorites already. I work with Aphrodite a lot. I guess I used to work with her more than I do now, because she's another one that I loved, that she seems really fluffy on the surface, and she's, the riding the seashell in all of the paintings and being all blonde and fluffy and sparkly. But really, she isn't that. Like, she's really like the alchemical goddess. Like, she's like the world changer. So I like that aspect of her, that she's kind of not this pink and glittery goddess that she's made out to be. I work with her a lot. And it kind of cycles as far as the year goes. I work with Hestia a lot during the winter time. So kind of the hearth holder, the fire keeper. In the summer's, talking about wild rhythms, summer's kind of like my dark time. So in summer, it's kind of my spiritual void, which winter is for a lot of other people, but mine is summer. So I don't do a whole lot of ritual in summer. Do a lot of traveling, so that's kind of my ritual in summer. And then autumn, now I do work a lot with Hecate and Lilith and the darker goddesses, just because I feel like this is their time. So the goddesses that represent all of those dark moon things that have been suppressed out of fear. So the dark, death, magic, feminine sexual power, like all of those things that Lilith and Hecate and Nyx and all of those ones that we were told to fear, all of the traits that they really embody, those are autumn for me. So I do work with them a lot right now.
Yeah, great group. What about Inanna? She's definitely one of my favorite ones, one that I sometimes will even try to invoke.
Yeah. Inanna, I love her story, and I do work with her story a lot. I don't feel like I've met her. I don't feel like I know her personally like I do some of the other ones that I've named. I like how her story is very similar to Persephone, and I like, that she's Inanna's myth is the kind of empowered version of the Sumerian version of Persephone's Greek myth. I like that. But yeah, as far as, really like knowing her well enough to work with her in my magic, I don't yet, but I do like her.
Yeah, I think I like her because, like you mentioned, Persephone or even Sophia, these are the goddesses that really go into the underworld, a great collective unconscious, or the chaos, the belly of the beast, and they come back transformed through a lot of trials and tribulations. So to me, that's the reason I like them.
Yeah, and I like the idea too that after they come back, at least as far as Inanna and Persephone goes, like when they come back, it's not a disempowering thing. So, it's not this great wounding that then follows you your whole life and you're just a survivor. It's then they become the beacon for other women. Like they're able to go to the underworld and come back because they know the way. And I love that too. Like, using your wound as a power source instead of, letting it kind of burden you for the rest of your life. I love that part of their story also.
Agreed. And another part I'd like to talk about is, and of course this is, again, it's misunderstood, like all these, like the term witch or all these figures in the Bible. But you talk about the concept of the fae or fairy. And obviously you just said you went to Ireland and so forth. Tell us, what are they and how can they be involved in one's spiritual path?
Yeah. So, so like Aphrodite, the fae aren't these pink and glittery, flying things that grant wishes. So they have a dark side also.
Yeah, like stealing your babies.
Yeah, exactly. I do think, to me, they're earth spirits. So, depending on where you are, but I mean, just collectively right now, I think that all of the fairies are incredibly pissed off because they are, they stand up for the earth. So fairies are really activists actually. And so, the story that I like about the Tuatha De Danann is that they just kind of decided like, nope, I'm not hanging out for this when man started, getting really into the Industrial Revolution. They just kind of decided they were going to take off because of all of the pollution that was happening. So I like that story. And there's a story like that about the goddess too, that's in that book, Mysteries of the Dark Moon, where it's like, maybe we shouldn't be talking about how the goddess has been stolen from us, right? Or the fairies have been stolen from us. Like maybe it was more of a decision on their part that they're just going to take a little time out right now while the world is terrible, and then they're going to choose when to return. I think of the fae and then, the divine feminine in this similar way, where it's like, maybe this just, isn't their time yet, and they're just on the verge of returning and kind of taking back what's theirs.
And how can we access them, or how can we call upon them? Is there a way, or are they just sort of, we can be more or less deistic about them?
So the fae to me have always been place specific. So like, right now where I live in this, relatively built area, I can't like go onto the sidewalk and like hope to see a fairy. I can't. I'm sure that some people can, but I can't. So, if I'm looking to commune with them, I really do have to go into deeper nature that I can access right here. So to me, the fae are place specific. So you find a place that you really resonate with, and going back to that idea of wild rhythm, like look to those moments from childhood when you really felt like you were the most you could possibly be, right? So those moments when your body, mind, and spirit were really yoked together in the same action, and actual moments, not like, I had a really good time when I went to that place. Not that, but like these actual moments in time when you really felt like you were the most you could possibly be. And then look for the patterns. So, and there will be patterns. So when you do that throughout your life experience, you'll probably find that you have a lot of elements of nature that show up a lot for you, and it will be unique to you. So for some, it's being near the ocean. For some, it's being near water, but more like, a lake or a stream or something like that. For some, it's being near a campfire, or just, making mud pies, whatever. So you look for the actual elemental themes that you have in your life experience, and then you use those as kind of gateways to commune with the fae. So if, for instance, you really felt connected to streams, you had a lot of moments in your life where you just kind of felt very at peace near a mountain stream or something like that, then, use those places as your kind of altars for communing with the Fae. And so you can go there, you can sit. It does take stillness and usually solitude. So it wouldn't be like children running around and your friends being there talking to you. So stillness and solitude, and then really looking and seeing. So you get this kind of soft gaze that I usually tell people. It's kind of like those magic eye puzzles that we had in the 90s, where you would like let your eyes go really soft in order to see this thing jump out at you.
Yes.
It's that same kind of gaze, and then you can usually see these different energies that are akin to fairy.
Great and good to know. And here's a question I had for you. I feel like there's two moments coming in time for me, and especially listening to you, Danielle. And I remember as a kid, I had an aunt, and she was very much into very heterodox stuff. Like she'd do Course of Miracles and magic and all that. And she would always say something like, I don't understand the world. If women raise the men, why are the men so screwed up? And my wife has been saying that recently. She's Catholic, but she's also done spells too on the side, binding and whatever. And she keeps running. She walks around some days and says, I don't understand. What are we doing? We're raising the men, and the men keep screwing up. What do you think of this? Because suddenly I just remember that instant as a child, how it stuck with me.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a crazy question. I have,
Yes.
I have two boys, and no daughters. So, I feel your wife's pain. And, in my experience, it isn't just me who's raising them. If it was, if it was, I feel like, they would possibly be a little bit more compassionate than they are, maybe, or a little bit more feminine. But, it's not just me. It's also, they have their father, and then a stepdad, but then it's the school and all of their friends. So, these, those traits that we're hoping to, dismantle, or the institutionalized oppression that we're hoping to dismantle. It's just so in there. It's just so in the world that I think that it just takes a lot longer than, one mother at a time trying to do her best. So, and I do think that is the way to do it. So, one mother at a time, teaching her sons the way, how to be more compassionate and a little bit more feminine in his thinking. But yeah, I just think that it takes a long time, and it's not going to be like a quick one generation result. But I mean, there has been so much progress, right? It's like in a single generation, it's easy to get really, disconcerted, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think that there has been so much progress, and it's going to keep getting better. Tell your wife.
We can only hope, because again, I think you hit it on the head, and I think this is something society has been doing for thousands of years. I mean, from the Spartans, is that let's come at the kids as soon as we can, and let's program them to be machines, and let's take the magic out of their lives.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's the same.
And it's hard because it's all over. I mean, like you said, raising kids, it's like you blink and there's TV and the phone and schools. I mean, it's like a second job to be able to help your children, again, live that magical life.
Yeah, and now YouTube and
social media
and the internet, social media, which is a whole other thing that is nearly impossible to like hide them from, it seems. So it's a different landscape that we're navigating, and just trying to put the magic in there wherever you can.
Yeah, it's almost, I think even your story, it's a story of programming and deprogramming yourself. I mean, and it's a lifelong quest. I mean, I am no longer really a Catholic, but I know that my deprogramming will probably last until I give my last breath. Do you feel that way too?
Yes, I do. I do, because I think, depending on your personality, I guess, when you're deprogramming, like there's a little bit of a love for the rebellion, right? Like there's like this just like, am I really feeling this? Am I really drawn to this? Is this really authentically me? Or am I just rebelling against everything that I was raised in? And I think that, that's kind of the great question after you get to it, when you start that unmasking and like the peeling back of layers, like, finding what's really authentic and what's just not what you were raised with.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The rebellion for the sake of rebellion ultimately brings no value. And I always know when I feel a great compassion for where I've been, or I understand why these people thought the way they did, or even better, I start seeing beauty in things. I used to start saying, oh my God, there is a lot of magic in the Catholic Church. There is a divine feminine. There is alchemy in the Mass. There's a lot of beauty there that I didn't see there anymore because I'm no longer, constrained or angry at it. How do you feel the same way too, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it happens a lot, when you're kind of raging against your childhood religion, and I think rage is the appropriate word in my case anyway, when you're kind of raging against it, and then you immediately are like, well, I don't believe in anything, and you kind of like run toward atheism or just complete like I am not spiritual, I don't believe in anything, and then there's like this slow kind of sifting through and starting to see what you said, beauty, like starting to see the parts that really are beautiful and that do make sense, and that just got kind of twisted and wrapped up into power, hunger, and greed and all of the other things that kind of took over the church. So yeah, I'm with you. I like looking back and finding like those little seeds of truth that were just kind of put in the same basket with all the muck.
Yeah, and of course, if you're angry or resentful, they still have power over you. You're still their slave. Right, exactly. It's like smoking. Well, I'm not going to talk about that because that's one of my vices. So yes, it still has. I don't eat meat. I don't drink, but that's one of my last remaining karmic issues that I deal with. But we all have them.
We all have one. Yeah, exactly.
And another question I had for you based on your book is, could you tell the audience what exactly is a liberated wolf woman? It's very cool.
So the wolf woman archetype that comes from Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and she talks about the wolf woman as being like the essence of the primal feminine, right? And so just like wild woman, primal feminine is words that kind of get thrown around a lot, and it's like, what does that really mean? And to me, liberated wolf woman and primal feminine and wild woman, they all kind of mean the same thing. And that is, they are the integrated feminine. So these aspects of ourselves, regardless of gender, these aspects of ourselves that we suppress during childhood, and then we keep suppressing them because we want to be socially accepted. Those parts of ourselves that are wild, and wild not meaning immature or out of control, but wild meaning those that really cycle with nature. So they're not unpredictable, but they do ebb and flow. They're not the same all the time. So, the parts of you that cycle, the parts of you that are very sensual or sexual, connected to nature, emotionally cyclical, right? So we tend to, like, during childhood, learn that we need to be very kind of in control and rigid and not show our wild to the world. So that unmasking that we were talking about, or that unlearning, is in a sense the same as rewilding, right? Because we're getting back to this primal kind of part of ourselves, and it's not compassionate or not awakened or any of those things that we might think of when we think of wild or primal. It's about being, recognizing that we are connected to nature, that we do have to be environmentally conscious, that we do have to realize that the sun and moon affect us. And like these things that seem really obvious, but they're not as far as society is concerned. So yeah, that's where the liberation is. It's like the ultimate freedom is in the rewilding, I think.
Yes, indeed. And certainly becoming authentic is the ultimate freedom, which is, I'm sure you agree, that's a hard quest.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's the only quest.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with you with that too. And getting closer to the end, tell us about your workshops, and if somebody wants to contact you, what can they expect?
So my website's danielledulsky.com, and yeah, I have yoga teacher trainings that I host in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and then moon circles usually once a month. And circle craft training. So, you know, if anybody's interested in leading circles, I host a training on that once a year. There's a companion course to the book, on the website. So there's all sorts of different things that I do, and it's all on there.
And this is all in person, physical, right? This is all, let's get together in our coven or sangha.
Yeah, with the exception of the companion course to the book, I do offer online sessions only in the autumn, so they're kind of wrapping up right now. But yeah, almost all of it's in person, just because I feel like that's the best way to work with people. I've tried doing it online, and it just doesn't feel the same to me.
Yes, there's something about the face-to-face human touch. So wonderful, wonderful. And how has the book's reception been? And are you working on anything else as far as a written book?
Yeah, I do. I have this other book in the works that I'm not allowed to talk about, so I'll just say yes and leave it at that. But yeah, the reception to Woman Most Wild has been really good. I did a lot of traveling over the summer, promoting it, and it's really cool to see, you know, people in like England that are reading it, and it's all kind of been a whirlwind and totally a new territory for me. But yeah, definitely amazing.
Well, good to hear, and congratulations. And but I think that's all the time we have, Danielle. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Bite and discussing Woman Most Wild, 3 Keys to Liberating the Witch Within.
Thank you, Miguel. Very happy to have been here.
And there you have it. Danielle Dulsky on her book, Woman Most Wild. This will be a rare time when the entire interview will be available to both members and non-members. Due to scheduling issues, some archons in the tech, and an oceanic flu I was battling, Danielle and I couldn't go more than an hour. Don't get me wrong, because you just experienced an interview chock full of gnosis and a puissant homage to the divine feminine. Having said that, our next interviews for members are long and spanning, dealing with the topics of talking to spirits in Gnosticism and the concept of gnosis itself, coming out in Halloween and beyond. And of course, members do gain more than 350 episodes with the best and brightest in Gnosticism, Western esoteric, and free thought, as well as access to our Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group, where we have some remarkable discussions and past guests hang out there too, like Tim Freak, Robert Price, Michael Hughes, David Perry, Robert Sullivan, and Rosamonde Miller. And I'm always there to answer your questions or issues too. And I do share updates and personal views you won't find anywhere else. We are truly building a game-changing community of mystics, madmen, and sages, and witches, and a great vehicle to make you gain the gifts of Hagia Sophia. Becoming a member really helps keep this Red Pill Cafeteria open. You can also become a patron at Patreon, where you get some of the same benefits, including early shows before anyone else. Or maybe you can help with a few shekels here and there via PayPal or the US mail. All forms of support are found at, you got it, thegodabovegod.com. Thank you so much for those of you who support on a weekly basis. And thank you all for being here, in the darkness of mere being, searching for meaning, with Sophia and me, and even her poor deformed son called Yaldabaoth. Hello and goodbye as always.